So let's continue to the next topic, which we are going to hear from the representative of Delinea. So this topic will be reduce cloud infrastructure risk with privilege control for cloud entitlements. So join me in welcoming APAC Director of System Engineering, Delinea. I'm on the stage, Mr. Nigel Tan. Please welcome. Big round of applause, sir.
Hi everyone. Just testing the mic to see whether it's working, and here it is. Right. Hi everyone, and thank you for coming. As mentioned, my name is Nigel, and I run the systems engineering team for Delinea across APAC. I hope everyone's having a good time at this CyberSec Asia conference. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about cloud infrastructure. All right, it's obviously a growing thing in our world, right? And something that we have to manage. And specifically, it also introduces a lot of complexity into the day-to-day job that we do in protecting it. All right. What I'm going to do today is talk to you about how they can be protected, and my colleague Joseph Carson is going to be speaking on the main stage at 3:30 to sort of give you the why, all right, and share with you some insights on what's happening through the mind of a hacker as they look at our infrastructure. So with that being said, I just wanted to lay the ground with a couple of challenges that we see organizations face on a day-to-day, particularly as they adopt cloud-first or cloud technology strategies. All right. The first thing that they are challenged with, with this whole cloud environment, is that there's an expansion or a proliferation of various different types of services, whether they be infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, right? And each of them manage things a different way. The identities themselves are growing, right? So you can imagine each of these services would have their own identities, right? And having that visibility to figure out which identity, would have access to what particular platform and what type of access is really, really challenging. Coupled with the fact that now the more things that you have, it's more things that you have to protect, all right? And so that's one of the biggest problems we're seeing with this explosion of cloud growth. The second thing is really when it comes down to the identities, right? And as organizations move to the cloud, and as we transition towards this new world, you want to have these interoperate with each other, right? And sure enough, you may have a central identity store, right, in one of your primary enterprise directories, but you want to be able to federate this into your various cloud services, right? What sort of access does this have, right? And it goes through this, it may go through a very complicated process, right, of assigning a user to a group who might be nested within another group, which would then have rights to a certain to certain roles, which would then grant certain privileges, right? So you can imagine as we proliferate the number of services that we have and the number of identity stores we have, that's just going to be, like you see in the diagram in the middle, a great big meatball of complex, all right? And what we're seeing as well with organizations is the pace at which this needs to happen, right? New identities get created every day, almost on a daily basis, right? New services get spun out on a daily basis, and they will need new privileges as well. So that complexity is also driving pressure, putting pressure on operations and security operations, right, to keep everything really in place. So what can organizations do? Well, these are the 5 main recommendations, right? First is try to gain visibility on what these applications or what these identities have access to, right? And the context in which they have access to the various systems, right? And the various roles that they may use. You want to make sure that these identities have, adopting a principle of least privilege, right? Essentially saying that these identities should only have adequate rights to perform the jobs they need to do, and nothing more than that, right? Because obviously one of the biggest problems we see is that a lot of these identities are overprivileged, right? You grant them global administrator access, for example, just to do a small part of what they need to do, and that's really too much rights to grant because there's a lot of room for errors to occur for that account. If it was exploited, the blast radius and the damage that can be done is a lot larger, right? While we're talking about the identities itself, right, and what they can access, there could be also certain misconfigurations, right, that would exist within that complex architecture, right? Perhaps we're putting too many administrators, right? Every time somebody asks for an administrator, right, we spin up a new administrator. Are we having the right amount of control around those identities? And that's something we have to work with on a day-to-day, right? And make sure that we can find and fix any of those misconfigurations. Then to be able to detect and remediate any identity threats that are present against this infrastructure, right, that we're managing. And finally, of course, right, to be able to continually monitor and adjust, right? So with that being said, right, and I'm going to dive down into each of one of these 5 areas. The first is about visibility, all right? Coming back to that area of visibility, organizations, need to have a single pane of glass, right, that they can see through their entire cloud infrastructure, all their identities and what they have access to, right? And we can give that through a concept of dashboards so that you can identify privileged users, shadow administrators, and non-human identities, right? Now, just to give you a bit of context on what those are, right? Obviously, privileged users are identities which you would deem have the ability to change configurations or do something in your infrastructure that could potentially be dangerous, right? Non-shadow administrators, you may have some IDs while they don't have direct privileges, let's say to add a user, right? So let's say they don't have privileges to add a user, but because of what they've been granted, they have the ability to elevate themselves to get to that stage, right? So if I had the ability, for example, to modify my group membership, I could put myself in the administrator group and then add users, right? So you see, this is the idea of a shadow admin, right? So there is a path for this identity to elevate himself to get to that level of privilege, right? And that's really important because you don't want that to happen. And then obviously you have non-human identities, right? And as we talk about connecting all these various services, you're going to have these services speak to each other, and they typically do that through some sort of API account, right, or a service account. So having that complete set and visibility is something that's really, really crucial and something obviously that we can help with, all right? We even have in the back there an Access Explorer that will step you through either identities or groups, give you all the memberships, the sub-memberships, and the eventual permissions, right, that are assigned. So when you're doing investigations, you can very quickly drill down to see all the permissions that this identity has and how it inherited them as well. Okay? The second part is really around refactoring. And that's making sure that you want to have the least amount of privilege assigned to users, all right? And how we do that is essentially monitoring that particular account or identity and identifying the privileges it actually uses over a period of time, right? So, for example, this particular, and you can see on the diagram on the right-hand side there, this particular user is, could potentially be a global administrator, all right? And because of that, he's got all the identities that he should have, that a global administrator is granted. But over the last 30 days, he's only used a few of those, right? So we're able to analyze all this and actually give a suggestion on how you could change or refactor that user to give him just the right amount of privilege that he needs to, right? And this is really, really important because then that helps with your cyber hygiene. It helps make sure that the accounts only have the right level of permissions that they typically would use, right, or that they need. So that's really, really important from that particular front. The third step, talked about, configurations. A lot of areas are, a lot of privileged accounts need to be handled slightly differently, right? You may want to have a stronger layer of control over how they authenticate, for example, right? So multi-factor authentication is one of the typical ways that we switch on to make sure that there's a secondary or a stronger layer of authentication as these users come on. Now, again, coming back to that point where when we have a very complex cloud environment with many different services, are we sure that these are all turned on at the right point, right, for these particular users? And we have the ability to then, again, scan the entire infrastructure, scan the entire, environment, and identify areas where certain misconfigurations, may be lacking, right? So things like, have all your privileged users got multi-factor turned on? Yes or no, right? And we find any that don't have it, it'll be alerted, so that those problems can be corrected, right? Removal of unused roles, right? Disabling non-human administrative accounts. These are some of the checks that we run and suggest fixes be made if they're found, all right? The fourth point, on an ongoing basis, you want to be able to detect and remediate any of these threats as they come about, all right? These IDs may invariably, inadvertently be exposed, for example. Malicious actors could have gotten hold of them and tried to use them to exploit the environment. We would continuously monitor the infrastructure and identify if bad things are happening, right? So as an example, if you see at the bottom there, we can detect something like an MFA bombing attack, right? And that's where the attacker might have a credential, and because that credential is behind a multi-factor authentication, right, and they don't have access to that MFA token itself, they're going to just keep on hammering that account. The legitimate user will keep on getting alerts on his phone or whatever MFA tool he has to accept or to authorize the transaction, and they hope at some point he's just going to click the wrong button, right, and actually allow that user through. So we're able to pick up on these sort of trends and alert when we see something happening, all right? Obviously, brute forcing, the account is also something that we checked. Now, once we detect that, right, obviously alert gets sent out, but more than that, we can actually also integrate to SIEM source systems to try and remediate it, right? Firstly, from our end, we can try and block the user, trigger MFAs, but we can also integrate to a source system so that other actions can be taken. And then lastly, as we talked about this, right, it's not just a one and done. We actually do have to continuously monitor and adjust as we go along. So continuous monitoring is extremely important. Just because we ran a particular task yesterday and all the checks were passed doesn't mean that today there aren't any misconfigurations that came in. So we want to be able to catch those changes early and correct them, right? And that's something, so our solution will continuously monitor for any changes and rerun all the checks, right? And again, alert when we find anything that's untoward. So with that being said, everything that I talked about can be encapsulated within our privilege control for cloud entitlements. And those 5 points, right? To be able to continuously discover identities, have unparalleled visibility across all the identities in your cloud infrastructure, fix any configurations or misconfigurations, enforce the principle of least privilege on these accounts, and obviously everything within a unified administration console in a single dashboard, right? And this sits within our broader portfolio in the red line, as you see in the bottom, right? At Delinea, we encompass a large part of the identity security domain, right? Everything from the ability to secure the credentials, grant privileged remote access, give you entitlement, a granular entitlement and elevation, identity governance and access control, right? And as I shared today, cloud infrastructure entitlements management as well, all right? If you want to know more, our booth is over just sort of on the corner behind on the right-hand side, as I'm standing on the right-hand side here, booth A15. Be happy to speak to you more, and we've got some demos as well if you want to have a look at it. All right. So with that, I thank you all for your time. If there are any questions, please feel free to catch us at the booth, and if not, I'd like to recommend that you attend my colleague Joe Carson's session over at the main stage at 3:30 later as well. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. ขอบคุณค่ะ Thank you so much for sharing us your knowledge and experiences and what an incredible solutions that delivered by Delinea. So again, if you would like to contact them in person, please feel free to visit them at the booth. I believe that they will arrange some of the information to all of the visitors and also that you can visit them and ask for more details. สำหรับในช่วงนี้นะคะขอบคุณทุกท่านอีกครั้งหนึ่งด้วยแล้วก็เรายังต้องการนะคะตัวของ Conference Survey ให้กับทุกท่านได้ทำการนะคะสแกน QR Code แล้วก็ Feedback นะคะสำหรับการจัดงานในภาพรวมนั่นเองนะคะ Solution นะคะสำหรับการจัดการสิทธิ์ที่มีอำนาจนะคะของ Delinea นะคะท่านก็สามารถที่จะไปดูในเรื่องของการโซลูชันที่สามารถที่จะช่วย detect นะคะช่วยจับนะคะการเข้าถึงแล้วก็สิทธิการเข้าถึงของผู้ใช้รวมถึงการจัดการต่างๆได้อย่างมีประสิทธิภาพนะคะสำหรับใครที่สนใจนะคะบูธอยู่ที่บริเวณหมายเลข A15 ก็แวะไปนะคะพูดคุยสอบถามรายละเอียดเพิ่มเติมกันได้เลยแล้วก็เดี๋ยวเขาจะมีเซสชั่นอีก1เซสชั่นด้วยนะคะก็สามารถที่จะไปฟังที่ Main Stage ได้แต่ว่าเดี๋ยวช่วงนี้เราจะมาพักเบรกกันสักครู่หนึ่งแล้วก็เดี๋ยวจะกลับมาอีกครั้งหนึ่งนะคะที่ Tech Stage ในช่วงบ่ายค่ะจะเริ่มต้นที่เวลาบ่ายโมงตรงเป็นต้นไปนะคะสำหรับ Afternoon Program นะคะทุกท่านสามารถที่จะเช็คได้บนหน้าจอด้านบนเวทีนะคะรวมไปถึงแล้วเราก็ยังมีนะคะสำหรับQR Code ที่อยู่ด้านหลังของแบตนะคะสามารถที่จะทำการสแกนแล้วก็ดูในเรื่องของ Agenda รวมไปถึงเข้าสู่นะคะตัวของแอปพลิเคชันของทาง Conference ของเราได้เช่นเดียวกันค่ะ Alright, thank you very much for all your participation, your attention in this morning session. We will have a lunch break for 1 hour and then come back shortly for the afternoon session, which is we're going to start at 1 p.m. onwards. For the afternoon program, we have so much to offer. So enjoy lunch and explore the exhibition, and then we will come back here and see you again very soon. Thank you very much. ขอบคุณค่ะ